Well, good evening. I want to welcome you. Thanks for joining us tonight. We are looking forward to a great evening together. So thank you for joining us. My name is Patrick. I'm one of the pastors on staff here, and we are just thrilled to be able to host this event. We think it's an important conversation for us to have. And so I'll introduce Lori in a moment. When Lori reached out and said this is something of interest and something that she's passionate about, would we want to partner and open up our space for it? And it didn't take much convincing. We think this is such an important thing for us to navigate in. And so, Lori, thank you for being here. I've known Lori for many, many years. She is a wonderful human being that I respect immensely.
I paid him $500 for that.
Well, we'll take care of that later here. So, but seriously, she is someone that I respect immensely, and am so thrilled that she is here. So I'm going to read a few things about Lori's background. Lori Robinson Salmon spent 20 of her past 45 years as an educator in the Grand Forks School District from 1989 to 2009. She has also taught as an adjunct professor of education at the University of North Dakota and was a Fulbright ambassador for education reform in Japan. She has spent the last 15 years of her career as a national consultant, training teachers and school administrators in 34 states and 8 foreign countries. That's quite impressive.
And I'm a Norwegian.
I didn't even know that. And you're Norwegian?
I'm Norwegian. Yeah.
Even better. I'm Norwegian as well. So we'll take it. All right. She is the author of the book, she's the author of the book, A Handbook of Unstoppable Learning.
Handful,
I need to pick that up because obviously the reading piece I missed in school here. So, A Handbook for Unstoppable Learning, and she will be sharing her newly released book, One Story, Many Voices. The titles that she cherishes most are Mom, Grandma, and Friend. And she is the mother of 2 families who are part of our Hope Church community here, Carson and Michelle Robinson, and Justin and Heather Johnson. Lori and her husband, Hank, reside in Florida. So I'm so thankful she decided to come and visit us in January. I wish she would have brought some of that warm weather with her. But can we give a really warm welcome to Lori? Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. So nice to be here. So nice to be here. Okay, I guess I don't need that. Well, hello, everybody, don't you know? I haven't forgotten how to say that really well. So, first off, I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of busy schedules to be here tonight. I know how busy moms and dads and grandparents are, and especially on a cold night, and so thank you so much for being here. Tonight really is about awareness, and I have to tell you, the only reason why I'm here rather than down there is that they're doing a live stream. I'd feel much more comfortable down here. So please forgive me for standing up in front of you here. Tonight is about opening our eyes to a very, very serious issue all over the world. And it is one in which in Pacific Island countries or places like Cambodia and Thailand, we've heard about it there. We've heard about families that maybe have come from poverty and of color, and we've thought that that's kind of the prototype of people who are victims, and that's not true. So tonight is to talk about awareness and having conversation, and I'm glad to see we've got some young people in the crowd tonight as well, and dads that are here. Thank you so much for being here. This is not a topic that men like to talk about a whole lot. It's not a fun topic to talk about, but it's really important that we dig deeply and work together as a community team on an issue like this. Patrick and Paul and the entire staff, Jenny, who helped me get this going tonight, those of you who are in the congregation here, you are so fortunate to have these wonderful people here. Thomas, you have been so helpful with getting things set up electronically, and I know you know that already, but man, what a great group of people that you have. We're in a wonderful church in Florida, but this place has really got some wonderful things going on. So tremendous gratitude for being able to be here and hosted by this great group. Just by virtue of statistics from probably the leading organization that Christie's Cause uses and has vetted their work is NCMEC, National Council for Missing and Exploited Children. And what we know, and this is a CDC statistic also, is that in this crowd of about 100 people, very likely we have 1 in 4 women that have been traumatized at some point in their life and 1 in 13 men. Just today, with about 30 people in our crowd that came to the workshop this morning, I had 4 women visit with me about issues that they had encountered during their lifetime. And so what I want to do is to offer a trigger alert. If you feel at any point that this is uncomfortable conversation, especially if you are sitting with a preteen, please feel free to take care of yourself, because this can be triggering. The organization that I'm here representing is Christie's Cause. And I will tell you, 5 years ago, and I live in Estero, Florida, which is 10 miles between Naples and Fort Myers. And I was going to church, and I heard this wonderful lady speak about her experience as a mother. And as I got to know her more, I learned that she had been sexually abused for 13 years by her father. And as a survivor and our pastor's wife, I got to know her more intimately. And we decided to join forces and began to take a look at how we could educate the general public on what a problem this is, because it is a real concerning issue. And so as a labor of love, I invited her to be the voice of the survivor in the book. I could not have written it without her. She put in information in there that I could not have experienced. And so the book is a fundraiser for Christie's Cause. It is a website that I would encourage all of you to access. ChristiesCause.com has resources. In fact, typically when we do talks like this, people will ask, where can I find out more information? And it is a vetted site. It is something that I think, in terms of body safety, body conversations, preteen issues and teenage issues with electronics and the cyber world that our kids are being bombarded with. There's some excellent sources on there and videos that might be very helpful to you or for you. This is my partner, Christy. She's a survivor.
I'm just going to adjust your mic here a little bit. So it's not...
Is it making funny sounds?
It is a little bit.
Okay, thank you. And I am an active Norwegian, so when I move around a lot, that's probably what... Is that better? Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Pat. This is Christy, and again, right now, what we are in development of doing in Florida is we have teachers from Naples that are willing to take our book and use it as a platform to educate the parent community and also teachers. So our plea, our invitation is to become a first responder. Whether you are a grandparent, a parent, an educator, a social worker, whomever, a friend. Because I'm certain that there are times that you and I are in a social setting and we get kind of a little feeling that something is just not right. And my invitation to you would be, please say something if you see something. And we'd rather be wrong, right, than to have something happen and not be proactive in that. This statistic is one of the whys behind why this book was written. In 2018, this organization, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, had a tip line that indicated that there were 18.4 million reports that were dealing with sextortion, child abuse, pornographic figures, or images that were going out online. These are grossly underreported. In fact, what the statistics say is that when we read numbers like this, it only represents about 1%. 1%. Fast forward to 2020, and we now have this tip line has been recommended, and people have been there to answer calls with 21.7 million reports. That's 3.5 million more than 2 years before. I would love to think, and I know you join me in this, that when we are seeing kids, that we see joy. We see kids focused on school and wanting to get a good education, but we have so many interruptions. Would you agree with me? We've got a lot of things vying for the attention of our kids. Sadly, these are some of the faces that you and I see often, and we don't know what's behind them. There's sadness, there's depression, there's anxiety, there are flashbacks. And what we know is that in the world of sexual exploitation and human trafficking, it is a $150 billion industry annually. I don't know about you, but that really concerns me. It really concerns me. And it's predicated on the idea of supply and demand. It escalates because there is a demand for the sexual industry. My husband and I were in Cambodia 3 years ago, before COVID, and we were in Thailand as well. And on every single street corner, there were young men who had cards where you could call a hotline, and you saw the dancers in the street. Many of these young people grow up, these young women grow up thinking that that is who they are, is a sex object. And they, because of the poverty in those countries, they really have a very difficult time coming out of that. I was training in Guam. There were 1,500 teachers in an auditorium, and Guam is the naval base for our soldiers in the Navy. And I had a wonderful day. We were laughing and talking about best practice instruction. And then we started shifting the conversation to behavior in the classroom. And I shared that I had a young 6th grade girl named Olivia, and I'm using pseudonyms for all the people that I'm sharing with you. But Olivia was a girl who came into my classroom, and she appeared maybe 20 to 30 years older than she looked, 11 or 12 years old. Very, very hard life. She lived right across the street from the school, and on Fridays, she became a different person. And I couldn't figure it out. I didn't know. I knew that she was a high-risk kid, but I would see her pacing back and forth on Fridays. And later I found out that Olivia was the award for the evening of her father's poker game. And so there would be betting going on. And Olivia was a sex slave in her home. Now, I'm mentioning this to this audience in Guam, and all of a sudden, the bomb dropped in the middle of the room, and I thought, what in the world happened? Because we were so engaged And it was 10:15 a.m. I'll never forget it. I asked the superintendent, what happened to the conversation? I didn't give the details that I just gave you just now, but I was talking about high-risk kids. And he said, Mrs. Sammons, you have hit a chord with the people in this audience. I would say that 3/4 of the people that are sitting in the chairs here in our Guam audience have been victims. And so he said, to get a better opportunity to understand what I'm talking about, I invite you to go out to the naval base. So I did. I was a Norwegian Oprah, ready to take a look and take notes and become proactive. And sitting in a parking lot, I experienced 3 fathers who took their 9-year-old or younger kids and sold them to our soldiers. This is a cash crop in a lot of third world countries. And the sad effect is, in the United States, the average age of trafficking is 12 to 14 years old. I don't know about you, but that concerns me tremendously. I want very much for my children, again, this heightens my why to be involved in this when I'm an old lady and need to be retired. But I want this world to be a better place for my grandchildren. I really do. And I know that that's something that's a purpose behind what you do as well. I will say that they're getting a little sassier. We've got 17 of them. This is what they look like. And the one with the black eye on the far left there is from Grandma, because last year when she came to Florida, she was holding my arms and saying, Grandma, I love hugging you because your arms feel just like marshmallows. You know, she's hanging on to all this stuff down here. No, I'm just kidding, and I'm going to hear about that when I get home, aren't I, Aaliyah? Anyway, I think the beauty that I see in some really simple words that come from Dr. Maya Angelou, when we know better, we do better. And so that really is what tonight is about. I'd like to read just a section of the book, and I encourage you to pick it up. Obviously, the stories are going to be pretty brief that I'm going to be sharing with you tonight. And I'll be sharing with you the framework of the book in just a few minutes. This is in reflection of the last 4 years. And to tell you how difficult this has been, I actually was brunette when I started this book. Quiet reflection is a profound teacher. This book has been a valuable journey of attempting to understand the mind and the actions of beautiful people who have endured such terrible situations that no child or an adult should have to endure. We all process differently. We hear conversations differently. Our reactions and our perceptions are seen through different filters. Through countless hours of researching and interviewing and observing and listening and reflecting, I will never have the capacity to fully understand what it's like to live in the dark places of a person who's been sexually exploited. I write this in the context of an educator, a child advocate, and a lifelong first responder. With that voice, I deeply respect and protect and honor the courage of each of the survivors who you'll hear about in this story, who spoke truth into this text. I feel it is the essence of Gibran's words expressed in these sentiments. I love this quote. Let us be so connected to one another that when one weeps, the other tastes salt. We are all in need of grace, and it meets us exactly where we need to be. Flaws and imperfections are accepted. Grace means that there's no need to airbrush the imperfections in our lives to pretend to be someone that we are not. We are all in progress and made new every morning. The landscape from which I write is one of faith and belief that even though we travel life differently, we are all entitled, every one of us, equal access to be happy and whole. That journey will never be easy, and it certainly is not linear. Involvement in the lives of others is very complex, and it comes without a formula, and this is really important to me. For those reasons, it is much easier to disengage and shy away from topics such as this, much less write a book about it and the horrific nature of each of the incidents. The scars left from traumatic experiences force most victims to stuff because they're so ashamed rather than dealing with it. But to avoid the topic is to turn our backs on those who really need to hear us or to be heard and to be supported. Choosing involvement in a matter such as this is really messy. It's confusing, it's conflicting, and very frustrating. And at the same time, it is invigorating, challenging, motivating, and for many who have not been able to speak, it is life-changing. What I will tell you in each of these circumstances, and I showcase 11 different survivors, and I choose to call them survivors rather than victims because they have spent years trying to claw their way to wholeness, and they're doing a beautiful job. But it isn't as easy as a light switch. It's something that takes a long time to capture. Each one of these 11, only one came forward as a person younger than 18. Every single one of them began to feel comfortable in talking as they became an adult. And I'll give you a little bit more information about some of those survivors, but I think this is so important to state. There's an empirical research that was done out of Harvard University, and the bottom line is that one significant person in the life of each of us can make a difference. Simple, not always easy to be that significant person, but if each one of us have one person that we can be significant. Deb, I know as a fellow colleague, we know what that's all about, don't we? There's some kids who were sitting in our classrooms, they didn't have anybody. And there are so many kids who don't have that cookie person that they can sit down and just talk about life. Very important. Our main character in this story, her grandmother was that significant person. Living in Florida, we are certainly aware, because we are third in the nation. In our beautiful paradise of Florida, there are so many people coming in that are trafficked. And a large portion of that is due to entitlement, and unfortunately white entitlement, and money speaks in those situations. Again, remember, it's a supply and demand issue. You can see it on the map here, the top three. Number 1 is California, number 2 is Texas, number 3 is Florida. Now, what I will tell you, as you can see from the legend, North Dakota is at the bottom for the least amount of incidents. Before you get too comfortable with that, again, remember that 1% of sexual exploitation is reported. And it was important to me this summer to do a soft launch of the book in my hometown, Manhattan. And then to be here in Grand Forks as well with friends and colleagues. And one of the ladies that was in my Manhattan crowd said, "Well, don't you know, I am so glad that I'm from Hatton, because this just doesn't happen here." And I said, "Have you been with me the last hour and a half?" It's happening in every town USA. It's underreported. People keep it out of the spotlight. It casts a negative light on families, and so many that have had to keep it inside there and stuffed. They keep it there because they're afraid of bringing shame to the family. In Florida, where I live, I'm in a gated community, a golfing community, and I showed this to my colleagues a week ago. In our golfing community, there are 15 convicted sexual predators within 3 miles of where I live. If I go out 5 miles, there are 52 convicted predators. These are adjudicated predators. The red house that you see is hard crime, and the reality, unless by an act of God, it's very difficult to change the activity of a person who is a convicted predator. Offenders, there are people who can actually get some help and maybe change some of their behaviors, but when you are a hardcore predator, it's very, very difficult, except by an act of God. When I left my daughter's home yesterday and my son's home last night, I looked on the North Dakota registry, and within 5 miles of their homes, there were 19 convicted predators. What you will find is that predators use the game of vulnerability and accessibility. When they are able to see that a student or a child is not feeling good about themselves, they don't know who they are, they don't have a cookie person or somebody to talk to, they become vulnerable and accessible. In the Grand Forks Public Schools, and you couldn't ask for a better district, that we have a wonderful district here. And I remember in back to school training being told, as teachers, watch the playground, watch the parking lots, and when you're going to and from school, there are predators who are watching to see who are dropped off, who are left there to walk home and walk to school, because they're trying to find out who the vulnerable and the accessible are. Unfortunately, in my family, one of my sons was followed home. And when we pursued looking more into an individual who was in a white Suburban, having a search warrant into that individual's home here in Grand Forks, there were over 200 pictures of children from our community here. And in the middle of it was a picture of one of my sons. And in a nutshell, the gentleman's response, the male's response was, "I love children." And nothing could be done. But 2 months later, he was followed out to Burke Edition, and he was caught giving candy and pursuing a young 5th grade girl. And I don't know where he is now. At that time, he was brought to court. But I will tell you, this happens so often. Our kids, when they're vulnerable and nobody's watching where they are, the predators know, they go where children go. So on the chat lines that our kids are involved in, they're there. On the playgrounds, they are there. In fact, I don't know if my family remembers, in July of last year, I had our son, who we hadn't seen for 2 years, as a missionary in France. And we had our grandchildren playing on the playground. And the kids are in the sprinklers, and there's music going on, and there's the bouncy house, and just having lots of fun. And Eagle Eye Grandma is seeing a male with a camera really focusing in on a group of teen girls in bikinis, and there were 2 young moms that were sitting with them, and I just had the radar. And I went over to the man, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he took off in a long run. I went to the mothers to let them know what had happened, and again, they go where kids are. They go where kids are. In Williston, when I was training teachers, I observed in oil country, as kids were coming off a bus for a football game, predators, ready to check out some of the kids that were involved there. This is not a scare tactic in any way, shape, or form. It is reality that there are minds that work in a different way, and with a typical perpetrator, you will find a very narcissist attitude. They feel entitled. And we know the Jeffrey Epstein story, don't we? We know the Michael Jackson story. We know the game plan is to find kids who are vulnerable and unattended to. There is no one-size-fits-all kind of predator. They are males, they are females. They come from every walk of life. We've seen people in the cloth, we've seen classroom teachers, we've seen daddies, we've seen many different kinds of people who become, permeate, that there's no distinction of gender, demographics, economics, or education. They're everywhere. This comes from one of our people who is on our research team. He is wonderful. Alan Wilkett is a beautiful Christian man. And in fact, we were fortunate to have our entire team be people of faith. And we would come together as we were putting some of the material together, praying that our hands would be led in the direction of accuracy and truth and genuine stories. Alan has been in the business of helping young men and women who have been victims for 27 years. These are the people that fall in the category of predator in my home area. What you will see on the registry, when you go to Grand Forks and put sex assault registry, you will see a person and you'll see his address where he or she lives. And notice that this is not only male, it's also females. Can you guess, as you see the hands represented here and the color of humans that we have represented here, which one is the survivor? Anybody want to guess? Every single one of them have been victims. And what you see right here is a pledge to speak. And that's really what this is all about in the book, is to give people a platform where they can actually speak and know that they're not doing this alone. Right now in our society, it is becoming so much more comfortable for people to come forward. Simone Biles, there were over 400 Olympic athletes who came forward in that case against Larry Bazar. Solidarity is important, and we're hoping, in fact, it has happened since I've been here. This is my fifth of 6 presentations in the last several days, and we've had many people come forward saying, I'm so glad to see that other voices are represented here in every age group, because I'm one of them too. How this started, I started my career in Grand Forks, North Dakota, in Devil's Lake, North Dakota, teaching. And my husband and I lived in that community for 20 years. And I directed a youth center. And I will tell you, when there's youth activities, oh boy, do the people come out, right? And so as I'm getting a list of volunteers together, I'm having people come out of the woodwork, and I don't know them. And at that time, we did not have a process 34 years ago of going through and doing a background check of some of our people. You know where this is headed. And so all of a sudden, I have this huge list of people, and they did not have the same intention of what our youth center mission was, to be a healthy place where kids could be protected. We had volunteers that showed up that were perpetrators. And so obviously we had to take action. And I met a young boy who, again, I will use as a pseudonym, John. And his story is so very sad. His mother had left their home due to alcoholism and abuse, physical abuse. 3 children in the family. John was a victim of the father. He slept with his father after the mother left, and he became a victim of the dad. It goes on from age 4 to 16. And during the time that John was growing up, he did not have much encounter with other kids his age. In fact, his father had instructed him that he was too smart to be around kids his age. He was about building men in his family, and he wanted this boy not to be hurt. And so, to make a long story short, what happened is that he invited other men in the apartment building to abuse this young boy. Finally, at the age of 16, he is now big, and he can fight back. And so in a rage, the father took him in a car. He had an army jacket on and a backpack in Minnesota, and he was left on the highway. In the middle of February, he hitchhiked to Grand Forks, and he proceeded to be a victim to males in establishments, and I don't know how he found them other than the fact that he needed a place to stay and he needed food to eat. And so he continued his life of being a victim. And this is his story right here. We did a public service announcement, and this is what you'll see about John.
My dad started sexually abusing me when I was 4 years old. He sold me for sex. I grew up thinking this was normal. My mother was out of the picture. I lived with this abuse for 12 years. After a fight, my dad drove me 20 miles outside of town and left me. I was 16, abandoned, homeless. I hitchhiked for hours to a new town where no one knew who I was. I did what needed to be done to survive, even being sold for sex. This was my normal. I knew nothing different.
He came to our youth center as an individual who was so smart and so manipulative. He played the hard game of he wanted to be a part of our youth center. And I didn't know that he didn't have a place to stay. As I began to learn more about him, I went down, he spent a weekend in our home until we could get him placed with a family. And I came down to wake him up, and he had a t-shirt that he carried with him that had some stains on it from his father, and he was smelling it. Later found out that, again, that closeness of being with his father, that's the part he took with him wherever he went. Very, very lonely, a master manipulator, and continuing a life of just trying to survive. Just to give you kind of a framework of the book, one story is the life of my pastor's wife, who was sexually abused by her father from the ages of 4 to 18. And it is pivotal to the rest of the book surrounding Elizabeth's story are the stories of 11 or 12 others of people who I know and love. And they run the gamut of people who I met in Devil's Lake, some in Grand Forks, some of whom I actually golf with in the summer. And they are now adults. And part one captures the story, so you kind of go through the chronology of their lives from ages 5 to 18. I will tell you that I could have written 200 stories. And over 45 years of teaching, so many of the stories are so similar. And I think, again, why I'm telling you that is that this is a real typical, the stories that we've chosen are both genders. They represent homes that are solid and some that are not. One young lady comes from a multi-million-dollar home. Father was very focal in the community. I'll tell you a little bit more about her soon. But part one of the stories, what binds the stories all together in part one is the factor of vulnerability and accessibility. Elizabeth was very explicit about wanting to speak to the survivors who read this story, and so she wrote a poem for us. Beautiful, strong, heroic person. Don't settle for smallness that they beat you into accepting. Don't settle for the lies that they gaslit you into believing. Lies like you're not good enough. Your body's an object. Don't you know you're crazy? But all the while, deep down inside, you knew, and you always knew, they wanted to take your light out, to snuff it out, because it enraged them. They wanted to use you up and consume you because doing so made them feel stronger. But they couldn't. They simply couldn't. And now it's time to rise from the ashes, to take hold of your destiny. One story, many voices, pushing back the darkness, shining light and fighting for all to be free. From Elizabeth, and her story is incredible. In honor of all the survivors who participated in this one story, many voices, either in this book or in your hearts, I dedicate this body of work to you. Love to you all, Elizabeth. Elizabeth finds herself in a home with a very vacant mother who never said "I love you" to her. I don't know about you as a mom or a dad or a child. Saying you love somebody is really important, to have that love language being spoken. But Elizabeth says, unfortunately, even though I'm in this home with a mother who's in and out, unfortunately, things went from bad to worse when my hero, my caretaking father, fell off his pedestal and I lost my childhood innocence. True to the Harvard study that I shared with you, that one significant person can make the difference in the life of a child and life of any of us. She goes to her grandmother, and her grandmother was a rock-solid Christian woman. She was visible in Elizabeth's life through her adulthood. And Elizabeth goes to the grandmother and said, "Daddy is touching me in places that I don't feel comfortable." So what we know of perpetrators is they begin with hugging, laughing, tickling, and then the kissing, and then touching in places that they shouldn't be. The game plan is to find out just how much the child trusts them. And you and I know, don't we, that when we trust somebody, we open up a lot more. That's their game. And so when she tells the grandmother goes to her son and said, I'm hearing from Elizabeth that you were touching her inappropriately. The father gets so enraged. He's a very successful businessman, and he hides behind the persona of being a real strong Christian. And again, this is just so sickening, but it's a big screen. And so the father says, "Elizabeth, if you tell anybody else, the police are going to take me to jail. And when that happens, you're going to lose the house and the cars. Are you prepared to do that to your mother and brother?" So immediately that thumb comes down, and now we have shame involved. It's why a lot of victims stuff their story, and they keep it stuffed because they feel, if I only wouldn't have worn the red dress, if I only wouldn't have said this, if only I wouldn't have gotten this close or flirted. And they begin to inwardly blame themselves, and they keep it stuffed. So I told you that we captured the stories of about 11 or 12 survivors. One came forward as a young person, one. All the rest of them, it took until they became adults to tell their story, because they felt finally they had enough strength to share it with someone that would believe them. Meredith is a 78-year-old woman who I golf with, and she has a handicap of a 2. Those of you who are golfers, she's a champion golfer. She golfed in many tournaments, and in the summer I golf with her, and I was writing actually in a coffee shop in Glade Springs where my husband and I lived during the summer, and she said, "You look so engaged in this, tell me what you're doing." And so we started talking about the story, and she said, "Lori, I'd like to meet with you because I have a story as well." So we had coffee together, and Meredith, in a nutshell, came from a very established family. She is a Stanford University grad. And her father caught her taking some coins out of a drawer in his bedroom, and she became a victim of him. One-time event, she lost her voice. A straight-A student, isolated, didn't want to talk to anyone, lived her life through adulthood not telling her sister who she shared a bedroom with. This is so typical of people who they're afraid to come forward and cast a black eye on the family. Meredith was 44 years old in a lecture at Stanford University, and the speaker began talking about how victims repress memories because of the shame. And she started to hyperventilate. She started having flashbacks. She had anxiety attacks, and she was institutionalized for 2 months. As a 78-year-old woman, she is doing fantastic things on behalf of young people. She's become very, very proactive with youth organizations, and it took her many years before she could finally face her father. The mother was very distant, very critical of her, and again, she represents somebody so not like your typical victim. But I will tell you today, as well as all the stories that you'll see in the book, they are all resilient. They're all hopeful because they've gotten therapy. Many of them who have had Christian counseling. And I will tell you, unfortunately, there were some situations with people in the cloth that have stepped over the line as well, with one of the victims in the book, unfortunately. And again, it's not to cast a light on any profession. Human beings step over the line. Jolly is, as her pseudonym suggests, I met her as a sophomore in high school. And when her parents divorced, a teacher swooped in to be a part of their family and said, you know, I will do anything for you. All of a sudden, the gifting starts. And Jolly has money now. She's got a car. She has access to a number of things that she didn't have before when her father was in the picture. And when Jolly was violated sexually, she told a friend who she was staying overnight with, who ended up telling her mom. And again, case in point to many of victims, she stopped talking. She withdrew from school. She started failing in school. Through her story and what she's done in a small community in Arkansas, she is really an advocate today, and she's doing really well. At the time, she was 8 years old, and she's 16 now, doing very well. From her story, 32 kids in their school, 32 girls came forward, cheerleaders, statisticians, kids from a class. One story came out and they put their hands together, and this man is in prison right now. Part 2 of the book is full of evidence-based clinical supports. And basically what that means is there's such hopefulness in the resilience that can be reached for kids who have been victims, but it takes a long time. One of the clinical supports is cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's mindfulness, it's prayer and meditation. Another one is EMDR. EMDR. Recently, I saw Prince Harry doing a interview, and as he's speaking and becoming uncomfortable, I'm seeing him do this. EMDR is eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And what it's meant to do is, as you do touch therapy, you take your mind off the trauma-inducing event that's causing you to be anxious. And he was speaking specifically of losing his mother, and how effective it was. EMDR is extremely effective. We also talk about programs that school districts have developed, how to document and how to get help. One of the things that is being used in Grand Forks Public Schools with great success is the Sources of Strength. And it is a wonderful program. And this is actually an international program, and it started in Bismarck, North Dakota. And the premise behind it is, of the 8 different sources of strength, one being resilience, is that if they can train kids in elementary school up through 8th grade, 3 of the 8 strategies, they will very likely be able to maneuver through trauma. It's an excellent program. And so the second part of the book is sharing some of the clinical supports that can be done to help children. I just love this picture. I had an opportunity to go to Japan as an ambassador when they were actually changing from 6-day school to 5 days. The Japanese education system is very, very rigorous. And it's when I first heard of the restorative art of kintsugi. And the idea behind it is that emperors used to have beautiful collections of very expensive pottery. And over years, they would find that they were cracked. And so this emperor went to find an artisan who could actually take the cracked pots and fill it in and make them beautiful. The story behind kintsugi is so beautiful. And I think, again, the potter and the clay, you know, of our Heavenly Father being the potter and how he molds us. But this particular picture is of a cracked pot that is actually filled with gold and silver and other precious metals, and it becomes more beautiful than it was in its original state. And when we have worked with victims, what I find with people who have struggled through their exploitation, they are beautiful human beings who, through their experiences, they have, through adversity, found themselves in ways that they didn't know that they had strength. They are more beautiful and more open and vulnerable in their stories. I think our stories help when we share them with other people. In fact, that's maybe why we go through some of the experiences that we do, is that we can't go through life without being there for one another. But these human beings are so brave, and they are making a big difference for people who have kept their stories. Each one of the survivors in the story are people that we know. This is a gal from Fort Myers, and we were out on the beach with her. And she is speaking beautifully and with strength. I'm going to have you think with me, and I'm going to relate this to Kristen's story. If there was a bear coming after you, running after you, anybody want to take a guess what you'd do first? maybe take a hike, right? One of our natural responses to trauma is fighting. We want to fight back. There's fight, flight, freeze, or fold. And with people in trauma, with Kristen, she did all 4 of those until she was actually rescued when she was at the point of suicide. Kristen's story involves a stepfather who came into the family, and all of a sudden he is inviting the 8 and 9-year-old granddaughters to come and spend weekends at their home, and they become victims. And so Kristen is now 56 years old, and she is pencil thin. She is a control freak, because she will tell you, and does tell you in her voice in the story, that she will never let an adult abuse her ever again. So her first response to being abused was to fight. The exact thing that happened at the age of 9, when her grandfather started touching her inappropriately, is that she went and told her mother and then her grandmother, and it was denied, which is real typical. You know, we in fact, the exact words that the grandmother used is, "What in the world do you think you're doing to the family name here? How awful of you. It's so shameful that you would be saying this about our family." And so rather than doing anything professionally right away, she said, "You know, I know that there's a counseling program at your school, and we can go and talk to the counselor there." And Kristen's response was to fight. She was not about to go and talk to a stranger about something as heinous as what was happening to her in her home. And so, fight, flight, she began to run from school, run from friends, isolate, started to act out. And again, as first responders, when we see those kinds of behaviors, these are the red flags that we're wanting people to know and understand. Fight, flight, freeze. I am going to isolate myself. I'm going to shut down. I will live with it within myself, but I don't want to be talking to anybody about this. Fold is what happens when people are suicidal. And unfortunately, we have so many young people, and adults as well, that take their life because they're living with so much pain and they don't know what to do with it. Kristen is helping, she's a member of our church, and she's helping rescue young men and women in the Fort Myers area. She's using her story to bring light to the problem and to help young men and women who have stuffed their voice for so long and getting help for them. I want to read something about what an advocate is. I was with some teacher friends the other day, and they asked me, "So what do advocates do?" So I want to read what this says. "If there's ever a time to step up and be an advocate for children whose voices have been silenced, now is that time. An advocate is a professional. They are confidential. They are solution-oriented. They are truth seekers of facts who protect survivors' integrity and privacy at all costs. An advocate acts from a trauma-informed lens and helps to build a support network around the survivor. An advocate is not a sensationalist or a storyteller who seek to make a spectacle of the survivor, nor does the advocate seek to act as a knight in shining armor. whose involvement is more about them giving personal gain than giving support and healing. We have advocates that actually come and say they want to help, and they're wanting to be the knight in shining armor. Advocates protect children.
Mom, I'm going to go to my room, okay?
Okay.
They're enticing kids online. This is actually our videographer's daughter who this happened to. Hadley's story. Hadley came from Grand Forks, North Dakota. He lives still in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And her story is one that happened a couple of years ago. She was 5 years old, and her family was going through a divorce. And unfortunately, there was incarceration, there was meth use in the family. The father was taken, and he actually had to endure a sentence also for illegal activity. When these type of cases are brought to court, rather than having a young 5-year-old tell the story of how they've been perpetrated, there is something called a victim impact statement that was made on Hadley's behalf by her mother. And in a nutshell, Uncle Jake comes to rescue this family. He is somebody who rents the building to Hadley's family. He is also a couple of blocks from a daycare center where he has normal sight line to children coming and going. And one day he comes and says, you know, you're behind in your rent, and I will forgive you 4 months of the rent. I will come alongside of you. And he offers then to take the family to church. He says, I will babysit for you. I will be available to you so that you can work, and I want to be here on your family's behalf. Unfortunately, these are called grooming techniques. Candy, gifts, promises. All of a sudden, the person comes in and tries to rescue. And this is what Hadley's mother has to say. She's now in court, and this is her victim impact letter. My name is Anonymous. I am the mother of a 6-year-old victim in this case, and I honestly dreaded coming here before you. I hate to be in any vicinity near you. I literally have so much anxiety at this moment that I feel like I could vomit. But I know that I need to be here to speak for my daughter. She deserves to be heard. The goal of this statement is not only to tell my daughter's story, but to give a clear and concise picture of what kind of a perpetrator is here in our midst. This is a criminal who has no control over his impulse and cannot be trusted around children or vulnerable adults for that matter. Before I go into specifics on this case, I want to talk about the impact this incident has had on my daughter. Because of you, my daughter has nightmares multiple times a week. These nightmares almost always consist of you coming to get her, to hurt her and to get revenge because she told the truth about what you did to her. You are the demons and monsters in my child's nightmares. And because of you, my daughter is scared of men, and she questions their intentions regardless of what is going on and who they are. Because of you, my daughter has been diagnosed with complex PTSD. This gentleman actually had the guts to say, I want to take you to this event in East Grand Forks where they were picking apples. And rather than taking all of the children as he had promised, he took one child, it was Hadley, up into a cherry picker bucket, and he sexually abused her in front of the mother and family and community. In Kristen's case that I just told you about, the grandfather, the step-grandfather, was brave enough in a Thanksgiving meeting gathering with 25 family members to be abusing Kristen upstairs. This is the bravado and the entitlement that many perpetrators feel that they're entitled to. They come in looking like a rescuer, and they abuse children in that way. How are you doing? How are y'all doing? It's sickening, isn't it? That's sickening. I'm sorry that I'm having to be here to tell you these stories. They're stories from this community. We have to be aware. We have to be aware and be responsive to red flags that we see. I'm going to just whip through these because I know that I see your eyelids going down. So I can't dance for you. You wouldn't stay then for sure. But there is something called an ACE assessment. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And had Elizabeth, as she was growing up, had the opportunity to have this assessment given to her, it's very likely that her life may have changed in some ways. It's an assessment that was created. In fact, I just did my senior assessment for my health, and many of those questions were asked of me. Are you safe? Are you in a household that cares for you? Is there anybody in your household who has mental issues, that type of thing? If you just put in ACE assessment online, I highly recommend that you take a look at the 10 questions that they ask. There are 3 categories, 3 questions on abuse in the family, 3 questions on neglect in the family, 4 questions on household dysfunction. Is there incarceration in the family? Is there drugs in the family? Are there mental issues in the family? And the idea of catching this as a screener, what is wonderful about it is that if we know that there, like for instance, Elizabeth had 9 out of 10 yeses. The higher the score, as you'll see, and I know that this is a small slide, but you can see a picture of children on the far middle right. As kids are growing, the higher the ACE score, the more likely they are to have long-term health concerns. And so cancer, stroke, heart attack. Each of these survivors that we have in the story, they are 6 and above. In my own life, in growing up in a family of alcoholism, with 2 people who I loved tremendously. My father was a good man, but he had an alcohol issue. And I saw things and heard things that were not so fun. And so if I can ask each of you in this room, have any of you been from homes of alcoholism, either where you saw it or people that you know? Yeah, lots in here. It happens in families, doesn't it? And these indicators help to be kind of a screener to get help early on. It will only be time that will tell how COVID has played out in the lives of many kids. And what I will tell you, firsthand experiences of working with educators in the Naples area, there were many kids who had family laptops at home. The story that you'll see in the book is about Sylvia, who had to take care of her children and was responsible for educating her 5 children virtually, and she also had a classroom of 40 kids. 31 fourth grade kids. She is someone who got a call from the school to say that her 14-year-old son had been cyberbullying some girls in the school. And long story short, the father was asked to take care of the son because mom could not control him anymore, and he became hooked on pornography in the presence of his father. So rather than doing virtual learning through school, the two of them were online. This isn't actually the young man, but unfortunately we have in many homes where there is not supervision, we have kids that are victims. Is Yvonne here? Oh, can I have you come up with me? Yvonne lives in Grand Forks. I have only seen her videos. I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, so I'm just so excited. Come on up, please. Yvonne is featured in one of the chapters as a survivor, and she is a beautiful, brave woman. Oh. Would you come on over for a little bit? Okay. So, would you dance for us? No. Okay. Well, Yvonne has a book, and did you bring some of your books?
I did, yes.
Such a beautiful woman. I respect you so much. I respect you so much. Can we take the microphone there? Can you give us kind of a brief, well, I don't know even how to be brief, Yvonne. You've lived an unbelievably incredible life of abuse, and you've come through it. And I think what I'd love to know, because I've watched how you love on your children and how you've broken some generational abuse. Can you speak to that?
Well, hello. Hello. Okay. Again, like she said, my name is Yvonne Griffin. I guess I want to share a little bit. My book is called In the Hands of an Abuser, and basically what it is, it's the first 18 years of my life. From the time I was about 3 years old, I was sexually abused. I was in foster homes up until I was 18 years old, 19 different foster homes by the time I was 18. And I can't count, probably, I think, like in my mind, 17 different men and 2 different women I was sexually abused by, being in the welfare system, being in foster homes. So I guess a little bit about that is, as I got older, I just wanted to really just be an advocate. I wanted to be that voice for those that don't have a voice, and so that's one of the things that I have done and what I'm doing now. I'm on the board of directors for CVIC as well, so I'm able to help and advocate and kind of work in the back, and I see one of the ladies here. And so I'm able to work in that aspect, to be able to kind of help give my input and, in what I think could help people that are traumatized, not even just saying child sexual abuse, but physical abuse. I have physical scars, and I can tell you each scar that I have on my face, my body, where they came from, because it wasn't just sexual abuse. I was physically beaten. And one thing that it has made me, and people just say, what is wrong with you, is I love people. I love children, because I didn't have that love growing up, so that it's like I know what I wanted, and so now I give back 10 times more than what I would have expected as a child. The cuddling, the love, and so I'm just an advocate, and like you were saying about, you know, to really be an advocate, but to come up here and tell you that I do a lot of things in the background. I'm a volunteer for which is our Operation Underground Railroad. And so I've gone different places. I don't tell people what I'm doing. I just go. I'll show up in a state, and I know what you visited me when I was down south in Texas, matter of fact, and I was doing some things down there. But it's a way of me helping another child, you know, because those children don't have voices. So if I can be eyes, and I can help to bring a perpetrator in, then I'm going to do that. And so I probably shouldn't be saying that, because many of you are looking at me, but hey, that's what I do. And so I guess a little bit about that. Like I said, I brought some books, so if you're interested, I haven't really.
It's an amazing book. It's an amazing book.
And so I really give a lot of the funding, donate to CVIC, of course, because that's where part of my heart is.
Can I ask you,
Yes.
because we have people from CVIC here, and they are a beacon, not only in Grand Forks, but really US-wide in programs that are successful. This group of people are so dedicated and so wonderful. Thank you for what you do. But I really wanted to ask Yvonne, because many of the people that were in our workshop earlier today were saying, what can we do? You know, we're grandparents, we're moms and dads. What can we do to be an advocate? And as CVIC is wanting to break generational abuse, how can we stand in the gap? What are some simple things? And I heard you say volunteering.
Yes.
You know, being a listener and an observer.
Volunteering, being a listener, but more importantly, one of the things that and I do so many other things, one of the things that I tell some of the people that I have in a group, it's called Let's Talk About It, is I tell them is don't be afraid, because a lot of times what we want to do is that, yes, my brother maybe is molesting one of his daughters, but we don't want people to know that. And we want to sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
You know, because we don't want to ruin the family.
Topic.
You know, we don't want to ruin the family name or that sort of thing. Be bold. Just think about that child, think about yourself, and just be a voice regardless of who the person is, of how much you love that individual. Just be a voice. I mean, I watch everything. When I go someplace, and like I was telling you, I go someplace, I pay attention to the children.
Absolutely.
Not because I'm a perpetrator, but because I'm watching the interaction between whoever they're with, the caretaker, the child, just to see, okay, well, what's really going on with this, you know, body language of the child, facial expressions, behavior. I pay attention to it all. And that's all I'm saying is just pay attention. Just pay attention and don't be scared. Just be a voice. Be a voice. Be a very bold voice for that child.
When you and I first visited on the telephone, I remember you telling me that it was so difficult that you were, you told me your exact words, you were the smelly kid. You were the kid that your mother said that you were homely. Mm-hmm. You are so beautiful. You are so beautiful. And in watching all the things that you have done to warm the nations, you brought in clothing and supplies, and you've been an ear for so many people. And I love your faith journey as well. And I know that
Yes.
that's been a huge part of what you do, is that God is behind that.
Yes, I don't do anything unless God gives me permission to do it. So listen to God's voice and be obedient.
God bless you, honey. Thank you so much for being here. She will have her book. Oh, Yvonne, this is so wonderful, so wonderful. I am looking at the clock, and I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to mention before we leave that this is something that we have got to do as a community to, in a faith community, in schools, in agencies, we must be a voice for children, and it cannot be done alone. We need to be in partnership. At Hope Church, you have the Mending Hearts, and I had the opportunity of meeting these beautiful people today. And we also have the CVIC that I would like to have representative just share for a few minutes what services you provide for the community. Can I ask you to come and visit Tracy, please? I was thinking that you were going to really do a little kangaroo jump here. I didn't see steps over there, so I thought, whoa, I'm going to watch this.
That's not happening. Thank you, Lori. So thank you for the invitation, first of all, to join you here this evening. And this is a problem in our community. My name is Tracy LeDuc, and I serve as a Chief Financial Officer for the Community Violence Intervention Center here in Grand Forks. As Lori mentioned, the ACEs study, we have identified that there are about 1,700 kiddos in our community that have 4 or more ACEs and are at severe risk for lifelong health consequences due to the trauma in their lives. And this past year, we also received over 600 crisis phone calls to our crisis line center from folks that were experiencing domestic or sexual assault violence. Did you know that on average, 20 people per minute are physically assaulted by an intimate partner? So during this presentation tonight, Lori, about 1,500 people in our community or in the nation have experienced some sort of physical assault. CVIC is here to help. We have a bold mission to end interpersonal violence in 2 generations. We deliver vital safety and healing services throughout the county and surrounding communities to adults and children experiencing trauma. We educate youth and professionals on how to stop violence and teach our communities healthy ways to develop healthy relationships. I don't want to miss any of the services that you might be looking for, so I'm going to just read them off of our card that I'll have available to you tonight. But again, we do have 24-hour crisis response services. We have an emergency shelter here in Grand Forks. We do safety planning. We have victim advocacy. We also provide legal services, safe child visitations and exchanges, domestic violence intervention groups, court advocacy for victims and witnesses of personal and property crimes. We also have therapy and healing services, and with us tonight, we also have one of our adult therapists, and for safety reasons, I'm just gonna refer to her as M, and I'm gonna have her stand up in case you wanna connect with somebody tonight that this might have been a triggering event for you. And so if you just take a look back, there's M there. If you wanna connect with her tonight, she'll be glad to visit with you. Thank you. So we do have individual and group therapy. We have support groups. We have animal-assisted therapy, telehealth online support, which has really, really proved valuable for folks that might live in rural communities, that it's not safe for them to come out during the day. They have to think about things like when can they leave and when do they have to get back so that their abuser doesn't know that they've been gone from the home. We have these wonderful telehealth and online services now so that they're safer. We have transitional housing services and education and employment counseling. We also do have a team of prevention and education specialists that are in the Grand Forks public schools as well as out in the county. Specifically, we have a lot of work that is being done in Amaretto and Larimore right now. So we know that we can change the culture this way. So those are the types of services that we provide. I also wanted to let you know I brought along a book tonight, not to peddle a book, but because this is a real demonstration that this community cares. It is absolutely a network of people that make this thing work. It requires health care. It requires school counselors. We have some school counselors here tonight. It requires teachers. It requires donors. It requires law enforcement. It requires folks like Yvonne, advocates and that are willing to serve on our board of directors. So thank you, Yvonne, for sharing a little bit tonight. It requires everybody, business owners. You know what? It affects you. You have people that work for you that are experiencing domestic violence, and your place of employment might be their only safe place that they go every day. So it affects our whole community. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you. Have an opportunity to work with a number of agencies. These folks are just terrific. They really are. I'm looking at the time and I'm going to be ending here. If there's anything that motivates me, other than trying to be a stable force in the life of my own family and my grandchildren, this quote is one that I have burned on my heart. Let us be so connected with one another that when one weeps, the other tastes salt. It is an invitation to stand in the gap for kids and to act on any feelings that we have that could possibly be a deterrent from heinous things that have happened to so many. Tremendous gratitude for this evening and you taking time to be here. I would offer the book to you. This is a fundraiser for Christie's Cause. To give you an example of one of the ways that this book is helping, in 2015, a young girl that would be considered someone on the street, they received a black guy as being called a prostitute, and the perpetrator was let go free. The sixth survivor in the book, Krista Hicks, is a person who has been on multiple sting operations to third world countries. Her story is incredible, like Yvonne's. And what you'll find in the book, it goes from one-time events to hundreds of assaults that have happened to these survivors. And they are doing well because of programs like CVIC and community outreach. We need to be standing in the gap for this next generation. And those of you who are young people here, I know that you're thinking, my parents are always telling me, stay off those phones, or, don't be spending so much time on social media. Just like the use of a hammer as a tool that can be used to build up, if that tool is used incorrectly, it also can destroy. And unfortunately, we have a section of our world that is using that hammer to destroy families. I invite those of you who came with your parents tonight to talk about this and to ask questions, to listen to what your parents, because they are your advocates. They're here to help you. When we mention things about don't go into your bedroom alone with the door shut and spend your evening on the phone, texting, because that's where predators are. And I will tell you, Ashton Kutcher, an actor, is working with a woman, Julie Cordua, fabulous human being from the Polaris Project. In fact, if you have an opportunity to go on TED Talks, look for Julie Cordua, the Polaris Project. She and Ashton Kutcher are joining forces to try and take down some of the chat rooms that are as part of the dark web, where we have perpetrators who actually, when they show graphic photographs of young ladies and young men that they have enticed into cyber world, they actually get cheered on the more heinous the crimes that are shared in the chat room, and they get points for it. So girls and guys, young people, those of us who are adults, predators go where kids go. And they know how to entice the vulnerable. We need to have conversations about this. And so with that, we know who the restorer is, don't we? Those of us that part of the faith community know that Christ is that anchor. The unfortunate thing, the reality is that for many young people that have been predicated upon, that might be a male who is a father, a brother, an uncle. In fact, as we know, many years ago, there was a campaign, the stranger danger. We were supposed to be concerned about strangers. And if a stranger approaches you, this is what you should do. 95% of the perpetrators come from our center of influence of people that we know. So we put actually billions of federal dollars into stranger danger programs when we need to be letting kids know that if they are being talked to and enticed by giving gifts or doing things to get your trust, we need to be having conversations about that. And if we see something, we need to say something on behalf of kids of the 21st century. So I don't know, we are at time here. Are there any pressing questions? We gave you some cards. And Jenny, if you would be available, if we want to spend a couple of minutes and then we'll let you go, are there any questions that people have from the audience that they would like to ask? Good. Then your eyelids say, be done, Lori. The cane is coming. Thank you so much for your time tonight. And we appreciate the investment that you make in the lives of families from this congregation and in this community. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you.